Hi, I'm Ron Borowsky. I'm a professor of cognitive neuroscience in the Department of Psychology in the College of Arts and Science. Our research involves mapping the mind onto the brain, or specifically mapping cognitive processes like reading and picture processing onto the brain, both temporally in terms of response time measures and spatially in terms of neuroimaging measures. We do the response time research in my lab in Arts and Science, and the neuroimaging research non-invasively using the MRI at Royal University Hospital using a technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging. This is a frontier science called cognitive neuroscience, and it's really cool to be able to study the mind and the brain this way. My research is supported through a discovery grant from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. It's one of the Tri-Council agencies, and I also work for that agency as a section chair for cognitive research. My research is all done in collaboration with my students, and I'm really fortunate to have such great people in my lab. My postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Marla Mickleborough, is funded through the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, and she's here to further develop our neuroimaging research program to study attentional and language processes in migraineurs and healthy controls, as well as to lead our clinical fMRI program, where through the cooperation of Dr. Paul Babin, the Department of Medical Imaging at RUH, we help neurosurgeons and neurologists localize specific cognitive functions in patients who are about to undergo brain surgery. We work as a team. That team also includes my Ph.D. student, Layla Gould, who's funded through an NSERC Canada Graduate Scholarship. And she's also doing neuroimaging as part of her Ph.D. research, looking at when and where basic reading and picture processing interact. As part of her master's research, Layla developed a method of measuring response time that's provided an exciting new window into studying cognitive processes. Also in the lab are Catherine Anton, who's an honors student, and she holds an NSERC USRA studying automatic reading processes, and she's about to go off to graduate school at the University of Alberta. Dr. Jacqueline Cummin is her supervisor there, and she was a former PhD student of ours in our lab. Also in our lab is Chelsea Ekstrand, who's studying interaction of spatial attention and reading processes, and Eric Lorenz, who's studying unconscious processing and reading. And they're both coming in to do their honors thesis, BSc, this fall. By doing research on the behavioral and biological markers of language and cognition, and particularly reading processes, we're developing a comprehensive model of language function that'll help us understand literacy in terms of both mind and brain. So here's an example of some fMRI data that was part of another PhD student of mine's research, Dr. Carrie Esapenko, who's now a postdoctoral fellow at a research institute at the University of Toronto. It involves testing a theory about semantic or meaning representation called embodied cognition. And in the panel labeled A, you'll see an fMRI map that shows in yellow activation that is attributable to when a person's using their hands to do an actual motor task. And then in red, you see activation that's attributable to looking at a picture and telling us how you'd interact with that object. And those pictures were all pictures of objects you typically use your hands to interact with. In panel B, we show what's actually shared between those two tasks. So this gets right after what's embodied about the motor cortex being used to operate these objects and your knowledge of how to interact with them. In panel C, we're doing the same thing with words instead of pictures. So the word cup might show up instead of the picture cup. And we see the same kind of pattern where your semantic knowledge is represented right near your motor cortex. And in panel D, we show, again, what's overlapping or what's shared between the motor activity when you're actually using your hands and a task where you're just being asked, how do you interact with the object?